Hello, everyone, and this is the freshest episode of Present Perfect podcast. And I'm so lucky and happy to have Cindy with me today, who is a very famous nutritionist, actually. How do you call yourself?
I like actually the term of just coach. And the reason for that is, although I do go deep into nutrition, I also touch on so many other areas of health. So maybe health coach, that one as well.
Wonderful. I also know that you combine the psychology and nutrition. How does it actually work?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so the model that I work with, and because I see it work really so well, especially with ambitious leaders, people who are time poor, is the model of bringing together behavioral science and nutrition science. So maybe just helpful is going a little bit into my background, in that I come from a background of studying psychology and working in a clinical psychology practice. And then I moved into doing health science and medicine at the University of Luzern, did my master's there. And only then I studied nutrition science at ETH Zurich. So combining that of, it's not just what we know about what we eat, how to manipulate the body through our nutrition, but also how do we put that into real life? And that's really where a lot of the psychology and the behavioral science come in. How do we implement? How can we make it not only nutritionally sound, but also sound for our intense schedules, our busy lives? And that's where I really see the longevity of these habit changes so that they really stick.
So the behavior part, the behavior psychology, is helping you to create those habits, the healthy habits.
Absolutely, because it sounds kind of boring, right? Like, healthy habits. And we all know the book Atomic Habits, where we break these big behaviors down into small habits. And it's great. But I would say in the last 10 years, we've heard it so much that it kind of just goes in and goes out again. But really and truly, that is the crux of how we get long-term change.
So what would be your advice for creating those sustainable habits?
Wow. So this is what I do on a daily basis, right? But what I see is the step they miss is actually assessing where they are first. And the reason why we need to do that is because what might work for me might not work for you, or might not work for somebody else. So yes, you can draw inspiration from these different protocols you might see on social media, for example.
Unfortunately, too much. And to me, I think also for most people, nutrition is something that is very confusing because you hear so much contradicting information. One day I hear all the benefits of cutting the carbs. Another day it's all about don't forget the healthy fats. And of course, the proteins. I think even when I go to supermarket, I have an impression that the world is obsessed with protein intake.
Absolutely. Even myself as an expert, when I look at social media, my head starts to spin because there is this conflicting. But what I often recommend to people is when you're faced with information or claim on social media, start with asking, what is the context of this claim? And that can already help. For example, somebody says you should not eat carbohydrates. Don't just take that on face value. Ask, why are they saying you shouldn't eat carbohydrates? Is it because they're saying maybe your body doesn't tolerate carbohydrates really well? Then it can sometimes be helpful for somebody to reduce carbohydrates. But how do you know? You have to assess yourself first.
So would you recommend for somebody who wants to find their own personal way to go to the hospital and do some checks? I don't even know which checks to do.
Yeah, sure. So we have so many options now because we have hormonal testing, we have blood testing, we have all these different tests, and they can all be helpful in their own right. But I actually start much more simple with my assessment with my clients. What we do is we say, look at how you are currently eating. Just take a food journal. And now this can also sound like a lot of work, but what can often make it easier is there are now applications that can help, just record for, let's say, 5 days what you're currently eating. And then you actually have a baseline to start from. Then you can start to say, actually, I didn't notice, but I thought I was eating a lot of vegetables. Actually, I only eat 2 vegetables in the week, right? Or maybe you think you drink enough water. If you track how much water you drink just for 5 days, you might notice, wow, I actually only get maybe 700 mils of water. And I would say start with that assessment, and also not just what you eat, because that's often where we focus on what we eat, but then check, if I had a bad night's sleep, do I eat differently the next day? You know, because sleep, we know, even the research, that we can have more cravings, especially for sweet foods the next day when we're lacking that energy. Or am I grabbing 4 coffees that day? So also checking these patterns, and that's really what I do. And that's where the behavioral science comes in. When we maybe have a stressful day, does it change the way you eat? All these things, noticing all these patterns. And then you can say, okay, now I have this goal. For example, you want to gain muscle, you want to be stronger, fitter. Oh, Gesundheit, bless you. Then we can say, okay, where do I have to go from where I am, not from where Susie is, for example, because her journey could look a lot different to yours.
But would you say that some things are universally true for everyone? For example, the vegetables, that you need 5 to 7 different vegetables per week. Is that for everyone or not? Or do I still need to take some tests that maybe my body reacts badly to some particular vegetable that I never thought of?
So we do know through nutrition science, which is quite a young science actually, we do know that there are some nutrition fundamentals, principles that just as humans, we can be pretty sure. It's never 100% certainty, even with any research, but that really that supports human health and our bodily functions generally. And some of those things we know is adequate protein intake, especially for women as we age. We don't think just about being a bodybuilder and like building muscle, but also for the health of our bones. But we also know that fiber is really important. So this is, why? If I ask somebody, why do we recommend vegetables? Because they're healthy. Okay, why are vegetables healthy?
I'm actually the same type of person. I always ask questions. So if you say all vegetables are good, then what is the difference between me taking, eating potatoes because it's a vegetable?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Versus something like broccoli, cauliflower, right? All these things that we see health influences. And it's because it has great fiber, particularly our gut health, which we now see more and more people talking about the gut health and how it can relate to our cognitive function.
Let's say our goal is to be as energized as possible, have the good focus, have good energy. I think most of the women that are listening to us now, and also men, have very busy, ambitious lives. So probably also stress level is quite high.
Yes,
so
I see that all the time.
If we have these goals, and I mean, for the weight loss, I guess many people want to control that because, I think the trend for body positivity is going a little bit away. Now more people actually want to have also the, physical appearance of fit. So not necessarily skinny, but fit.
Yes.
What would be then the parameters on which to pay attention,
Sure. So if we look generally overall, then we can really have the buckets of nutrition, which we include hydration. We can think about training, so your fitness, and that's both your fitness like in the gym or strength training, but then also movement. So daily movement is also really, really important. And then we have the bucket of sleep. And then we have the bucket of managing that stress, right? So that also plays a component. And that can be broadly the buckets we can look at. But if we shift just into nutrition, we want to think, are we supporting muscle mass for health? The reason why muscle mass is so important is because it's linked to having less chronic disease. It's linked to having more energy and focus, better performance. And it's also very protective because as we age, we do generally lose muscle. So we want to try to build it as much as possible. Then we want to make sure we don't have nutrient deficiencies. And actually, this is where some testing can be helpful. Instead of taking all the supplements and feeling like, I just have to take everything, we always try to start with food first. And the way we do that is having a variety of produce in our diet. So a variety of proteins, a variety of carbohydrates, a variety of fats. And that can really ensure that we get all those micronutrients that we need.
It also happens to me that I'm just so much into the thought process that I forget to drink or sometimes even to eat sometimes, really, because, when you're focusing so much, happens.
Absolutely. And it's just bringing that awareness that can often really be the first step that you can take.
Cindy, I have also noticed that many people, especially on social media, they demonize some of the products, some of the food components. Sometimes I even see those reels that are telling that, potato is awful or buckwheat is awful because there is a high glycemic index. I don't even know what it is, but I'm thinking, okay, but how can that be so bad? It is a vegetable and it is something that, if I don't fry it, if I don't deep fry stuff, I always thought that it cannot be so bad. So how do I even treat this information?
Yeah. Again, going back to that question, for who, in what context, with what goal? So is it saying for somebody who is severely insulin resistant or has diabetes and their body really struggles to process these carbohydrates, even when they are quote unquote healthy, meaning they have some nutrients in them. The reason why processing can be something that we don't want is because often it strips nutrients from food and then it adds in lots of added fats or added sugars that our bodies don't need. Are potatoes bad? No. Do some people do better when they have rather other vegetables or things? Yes, there are circumstances.
I have an impression that nowadays a big problem that many women are facing is bloating. Maybe I'm just, I don't know, this is the algorithm that targeting me specifically, don't know why. Yeah. But would you say that among your clients there is also a lot of complaints about bloating?
Yes, 100%. And even I was just giving a keynote the other day, and this in the Q&A, this also came up a lot. It's like, I don't know why I'm bloated all the time. And the reason why I believe we are seeing this increase is because we really don't take any time to eat. So eating too quickly, eating under stress, eating with screens, being distracted. What we do know is that the body digests food best when we are in a calm, relaxed state, right? Rest and digest state. Take time also having a positive mindset around food. So I see women coming in with a very negative, relationship to food, if we can call it that. And they often experience this unexplained bloating. Because sometimes they often feel like they are at war with what's on their plate, or they eat something, but in their minds they're thinking, I really shouldn't be eating this.
Oh, I really recognize this,
and,
really.
Yeah, and I try to bring them away from that. There are no good foods and bad foods. They are just maybe foods that in this circumstance or for your goal is more helpful towards your goal, and some that actually it's not so helpful. And a framework that I like to use, and maybe the listeners can also take this away, is thinking about food as having various functions, not just one function. You might hear, maybe you've heard this on social media, food is fuel. You shouldn't, try to enjoy it. You should just have food is for fuel, for performance.
Sure.
Right?
I even know someone who is taking, I forgot the name of it, but it's kind of the powder that you just mix with water and eat it instead of the food.
Yeah.
Because it's supposed to have all of the nutritions, all the proteins that you cannot get from normal food.
Yes. And for me, the danger with this is that as humans, food is not just fuel to us. And some people are surprised to hear me say that because, I do work with, really the scientific power of what food can do on a molecular level in the physical body. But food to humans is also pleasure. It's also social connection. But then we also have the psychological function of food, how it makes us feel. We don't have to be afraid of comfort food. What we have to be afraid of is when we rely too much on comfort food and we don't have other coping mechanisms in our lives, because that's when we can really start having an unhealthy relationship with food, maybe obsessive eating and then overeating and gaining weight. But then there's also the social aspect of food. And this is also a part that I celebrate. To give you a concrete example of a client of mine who wants to enjoy that social function of food, but also has a body recomposition goal. They want to build muscle. They want to lose body fat, get into better shape and healthier. That would look like saying, you know what, I still go and have fondue, but maybe I have something small meal before that contains some protein and vegetables, that I'm not so hungry when I go to the invitation, that I wasn't, some, especially women, what they do is they say, I'll starve myself all day, I'll save up, because you've been really good all day.
Yeah.
Then you start to make really unhealthy choices like additionally, alcohol, then having, so much of the fondue to the point where your belly hurts afterwards, right?
Yeah, kind of over rewarding your. I think I have a theory why women, of our generation quite often skip a meal or really demonize some of the meals. I think, I was born in the 90s, so I was growing in the 2000s, in the, zeros. And there, I remember when I was a teenager, all of the magazines for women, they're full of diets that literally were 2 cups of coffee, no sugar, a cabbage leaf, and that's it.
Absolutely.
And 2 eggs.
Absolutely. And you might be surprised to hear this, because a lot of my clients are surprised when one of the first things I tell them to do when we start working together is eat more. So often what I see is, like you said, women really eating very little throughout the day, and then at night really overeating and also making unhealthy choices because they're so hungry.
Actually, do you have suggestions for people who skip breakfast? I think it is a very common thing to just for breakfast have a cup of coffee and milk, and maybe this is also could be something cultural, because I come from Latvia, and in Latvia for breakfast we typically eat a lot. We would take a porridge, coffee or tea, but that would be a whole meal.
Yes.
But here I notice, and also if you go to Italy, and for breakfast,
croissant.
if you get something that's not just a sweet pastry, that would already be revolutionary.
Absolutely. And here as well, right? So we have a gipfel and a coffee. One way you can test for yourself is have a breakfast and see how you feel. Because often just we don't, right? So we don't know. And some people say, oh, I'm not hungry in the morning. And then what we find is they have a coffee or 2 or even 3. And then later on in the day, they just feel like their energy is on this roller coaster, or they feel like they have no energy. And what I say is, let's try a breakfast, a nutritious breakfast. Like, I'm a mom, like I really don't have time in the morning. But can you prepare something before? And that's also how I support my clients. Can we look to how can we set ourselves up? Not for the best day, not for the day where you have all the time and you can casually do your breakfast, but for the day where you're rushing out of the door. Maybe that can look like having something that you pre-made that's in your freezer that you can then just take out, to something in your refrigerator that you can just take and grab and go with you. So setting yourself up for the worst day.
Actually, what is that for you? Something that you typically have in the fridge?
Good question. For me, I usually always have some boiled eggs. So that's a quick something. I usually have some skyr, so skyr yogurt, or quark, so like a higher protein yogurt. And then also I will also have some fruit in my fridge.
I have another question, because you have mentioned that many people have this bad habit of eating in front of a YouTube video or when they are watching something else. And my question would be, but how does it impact the fact that, I am still eating my lunch? If I do it in front of a YouTube video, what's the difference does it make? Maybe it's a long one, so I'm not even rushing through it.
Sure. Yep, good question. So we have 2 types of stress. We have distress, so it's like the bad stress, and then we have eustress, which is like kind of a good stress. But things like watching a video, anything that's overly stimulating, even if it's positive, it really takes away from the brain signaling that you are now eating, that you need to produce the hormones, so your fullness hormones, for example, which is called leptin. These things get hijacked when we are doing something that's very stimulating as well.
Cindy, but talking about lunches, I don't know how many times I've heard people complaining to me that after lunch, they just want to sleep.
The afternoon crash, the notorious afternoon crash.
How does this happen, and what to do to not have it finally?
Yeah. So part of it is also natural. So we have to also remember that our body has a rhythm throughout the day, and often there is a dip in cortisol that happens, which is the stress hormone, but it's also the hormone that makes us alert. So we demonize cortisol, but cortisol actually has a very great role in the body. For example, it wakes us up in the morning. So we really want to go with the body's natural cycle, but try to help it out as much as possible. And what that could look like is, it's very natural to have that dip, but we can try to identify what foods minimize that dip in the afternoon for me personally, and what foods actually make that crash worse. And for a lot of people, highly processed sugary foods, like a chocolate bar, for example, will take you up and give you that heavy crash after. or things like, for some people can be carbohydrates, or it could be when you eat a meal that actually feels really heavy. But one amazing tip that's actually not related to nutrition but can help hugely with that afternoon crash is a quick 10-minute walk. A brisk walk is even more helpful post-meal.
Since we're talking about lunch, and it happened to me, I don't know, a million times, that I was not preparing something in advance at home. So at the lunch break, I had to rush to Coop or Migros to get something that's already prepared and have it in the container in front of the desk. Let's say I'm having a lunch quickly together with my colleague, but we still go to Migros or Coop to grab something. I understand it's different for everyone, but what would be something that you would say for most people would work best?
Yeah, as you correctly said, so tricky to give individual advice. But as a general rule of thumb, what we can take from the principles that I mentioned earlier is finding source of protein and fiber as the base.
I have a provocation here.
Yes?
When I'm taking all the vegetables for the salad, what about the sauce?
If you have a fat loss goal, which a lot of my clients do, then the salad sauce is very high in added fats, and it is going to take that salad up in calories, in energy. It's not toxic. It's not going to poison you, but it is going to get you fuller for that caloric budget you have for the day. And what you could add instead is, for example, you could do a squeeze of lemon over. That can also be really good. Or using something like a balsamic vinegar as your dressing. And then depending on your goals and where you are, adding complex carbohydrates, things like whole grains. So it could be some rice ball or lentils. For example, Migros sells a lentil salad, or chickpeas or something like that. So you can add some fruit, and you could also maybe want to add some healthy fats. So something like avocado, something like olives, or also depending on your goals, you can add a sprinkle of nuts over your meal.
Right.
So really that base of protein and veggies, and then adding either carbohydrates or fats, depending on your preference, or even both.
Is there also something that I have to pay attention to, particularly if I want to follow a healthy option? I mean, in particular, do I need to be afraid or aware of all the conservatives, preservatives, everything that starts with the E?
So with this, I would say not as a first step, a second step, or a third step. Because often what we find, if we start a nutritional journey, being extremely obsessive about, E numbers or like these additives or things like that, we often miss the foundational changes. So do we want a diet full of processed foods? And maybe it's helpful to clarify, what does processed food mean? Instead of eating apples or pears, having apple juice, for example, like really ultra-processed foods that really strip all the nutrients
this
away.
This one is really sad. Because
apple juice?
I'm a big fan of Apfelschorle.
Yeah, Apfelschorle is good. Apfelschorle is good. And again, it can fit into an overall diet. But if you're drinking Apfelschorle every day instead of water, not going to be so helpful for your health. But what I would say is, you don't have to take it away completely. And often this is where people make the mistake. They want to strip everything that is processed out of their diet. You can make subtle tweaks, and this is what I help people do to make it more realistic. If you go to someone's house, if they offer you some Apfelschorle, yes, please, but could I also have some water? And could I add some water to that to, thin it down where you still get the taste, but you're also now getting more hydration and less of that sugar spike?
I'm also trying to see how can we combine paying attention to what we eat. So, for example, writing it down or taking pictures with the app. So having the control, but then not having our full mind space occupied with this, because I often see that, especially women, we want to do our best. When we get to know that something is good for us, then we really try our best to do it 100%. And I absolutely understand it, because when you are aware that something is good, you want to be good towards yourself.
Absolutely.
Yes. But then I see so many times, and not only of my generation, but overall for women, that we then obsess to the extent that the whole talks, the whole mind space, everything that we think of the whole day really spins around the topic of what do I eat, how do I arrange for it, how do I make sure that I compensate for the proteins I didn't take before. So how to find this balance to do the right thing but still have a joyful life?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And you're so right. I also see this all the time. And often by the time a woman comes to me, they've been through so many different diets. They actually just have so much stress around food, so much anxiety around food. It's okay that you've had the struggles, and it's not necessarily that you failed, because often they feel that they failed, but that the systems that you tried have failed you. So really approaching it from a positive perspective versus a punishment, or I need to not eat this and I need to be super disciplined. What I see often, especially with women, is we try to be perfect. You said 100%. I say, let's aim for 80. Let's aim for 70. If you're having a really bad day, maybe we aim for 50, because it's not realistic, and chances are you are going to fail, and then you're going to feel like you failed. No, your system failed you if your system told you needed to be 100%. Even when I give somebody a plan, we discuss what happens when you cannot follow the plan. If you plan to do your perfect home-cooked meal and you had everything planned out, but it just didn't work that way, do you have something in your freezer that you can just heat up, even something you can just put in the oven and not do anything else with it? That can be your backup plan that can get you to 60, 70, 80%, even though it's not that perfect 100% meal. And women particularly tend to either be 100 or 0 often.
I really love that you're mentioning the freezer, because I was thinking that it really makes sense to have a bigger freezer, because usually you have huge fridge,
and in
small
Switzerland
freezer.
You have the smallest freezers.
Exactly. And I was thinking, but it is so unpractical, and I did not think about it, before I actually started to think that I want to prepare something in advance, because frozen vegetables, they will provide me almost the same nutrition as the fresh ones, right?
And often we are afraid of frozen vegetables, think they're not as healthy. They are, and in fact, they can just. The reason why they're better is because they can always be there for you, so that you can just have it when you need it. And sometimes it can feel overwhelming. And some advice I give is either work with someone who can make it more doable for you, shameless plug. But if you don't have that option, then partner up with a friend, partner up with somebody who is also wanting to improve their health, and say, hey, what are you prepping? And just get some ideas. Or, even ask ChatGPT.
I think many people calculate what they should be eating per day in terms of calories based on the fitness gadgets, actually. I do have an Oura myself.
What I would say is a much, much better way to calculate your needs is to actually take a log of what you eat and to calculate that, and then you have to check how much activity you do generally, not how much activity you wish you do or you plan to do. The reason why calculators and fitness watches, they use general statistics algorithms.
Cindy, on the topic of weight loss, I have a really provocative, maybe even polarizing question. What's your take on Ozempic?
I'm going to be completely honest. My opinion on it has changed over the past few years. And the reason for that is because of what we're seeing emerging in the science from it. So when it first came out, one of the biggest concerns we had is, people working in nutrition and health, and especially wanting to build strong humans, strong women with muscle. We really saw a lot how when people were taking Ozempic and not taking care of the other lifestyle factors that's important, they were losing muscle at an alarming rate. And then we knew as I mentioned earlier as well, for bone health, muscle loss, it's not just because we want to look great. It's really devastating to the body when we lose muscle. Sarcopenia happens when we lose muscle, and bones get weak as well. However, now what we have seen in the science is that if you can do things to mitigate these side effects, it can actually be helpful to people who really genuinely struggle with appetite regulation, really on a hormonal level. So maybe very basically, what I can explain what Ozempic does in the body, it actually works in the brain and in the gut as well, when we release hunger and fullness hormones, and it creates a feedback loop with our satiety, our fullness. So when you take a GLP-1, what Ozempic is, it really makes you feel, this is its most strong mechanism, it makes you feel fuller on far less food. But often what happens then is we eat far less food, we also eat far less protein, far less healthy food, and we don't get those micronutrients. And what I recommend, and now I work with clients who take this medication, is that we do it together with lifestyle intervention and change. And then we can mitigate this muscle loss. We can make sure you're not becoming nutrient deficient.
Cindy, there is also nowadays a great interest in so-called biohacking and generally the whole wellness industry, but also longevity. I think there is millions, billions being poured into the topic of longevity.
Sure.
And for that reason, I guess there is also a lot of supplements, a lot of protocols that being overhyped or maybe not overhyped. What's your scientific opinion about it?
Yeah. So it's not a very sexy opinion, but what I feel is the best biohacks you can do is eat adequate amount of protein, especially for your goals. You can stay hydrated, which again is not so sexy. What does that mean? For the average person, we're looking at 2.5 liters. You want your urine to be, relatively pale in color. And then it's prioritizing quality sleep. That's a biohack, in my opinion.
So would you say this is something that is holding most people back from making the change, that they don't have a system or they don't have a plan, like a project plan on what to do with this data?
Yes, it's about they want to start just by doing something, often because we feel so motivated, and it's great. And I love it when people come to me motivated. But it's then saying, look, we really need to take that step back to first assess, then create a plan, and then execute. And then we can do a feedback loop of like, okay, now we can iterate on the plan and make changes. And also people feel like if they try one thing, they have to stick with that. Or otherwise it shows they don't have discipline. No, maybe you can tweak it. Take pieces of this diet, take pieces of this protocol. And that's what I help them do. I don't have one way of eating that I follow, that I advise people. It's about picking the best parts and creating something for yourself. But the original question you asked is about biohacking, right? So again, for me, I'd love to see the biggest hacks is nutrition, quality, hydration, sleep, stress management. But some of the things that I see that are really overhyped, for example, are like detox protocols. That's something you also might see a lot on social media.
Of course.
The body has a fantastic detox system itself. And some of these, detox teas or these detox potions and things are really, really overhyped. Actually, maybe to leave the listeners with something even more practical, the last thing I would say is this 2 words is just start. It sounds too ridiculously simple, but I promise you, that habit can be an anchor habit, and then you can stack other healthy habits. So please, tomorrow, do me a favor and just start with one small healthy change.
Wonderful. So listeners, dear listeners, you've heard Cindy, she said just start. So let's try.